A lot of people watching this video have had the exact same experience. You go to the doctor, you explain that something's clearly wrong. You're exhausted all the time, your brain feels foggy, your body feels inflamed. You don't recover the way you used to, so your doctor orders blood tests. And a week later, they come back. Everything looks normal. Your thyroid's fine. Your iron looks fine. Your inflammatory markers look fine. And you're told something like, good news, your labs are great. But here's the problem. You don't feel great. Not even close. And at that moment, a lot of people begin to wonder if maybe it's all in their head. But the truth is something very different is usually happening. In many cases, your tests are normal because they're measuring the wrong things. And today I want to walk you through why that happens. Because when you understand why most blood tests actually measure, you start to see why people with chronic fatigue, brain fog, Lyme disease, long COVID, autoimmunity, and chronic inflammation often fall completely through the cracks. Let's start with something important. Most routine blood tests were designed to detect acute disease. We're talking things like infections, organ failure, severe inflammation, and dangerously abnormal hormone levels. In other words, they're very good at finding problems that are already severe enough to show up clearly in the bloodstream. But many chronic illnesses don't behave that way. They operate in a much more subtle part of the body. And that part of the body is the energy system of your cells. Because almost every symptom people describe in chronic illness eventually comes down to one core problem. Your cells are struggling to produce energy. And when your cells struggle to produce energy, everything downstream starts to suffer. We're talking your brain, your muscles, your immune system, your ability to detox and recover. All of it depends on one thing, energy. And that energy is produced in tiny little structures inside your cells called mitochondria. You've probably heard of this phrase before. Mitochondria are often referred to as the power plant of the cell. And it's not an exaggeration. They convert oxygen and nutrients into ATP, which is the chemical energy your body uses to virtually run everything. I mean, without ATP, cells can't perform their normal functions. And when enough cells start to struggle, you begin to feel the symptoms. We're talking brain fog, fatigue, muscle weakness, poor recovery, even sleep disruptions. But here's where things get interesting. Most standard blood tests don't actually measure how well your mitochondria are functioning. They measure markers floating in your bloodstream. And there's a big difference between those two things. Think about it like this. Imagine a city where the power plants are slowly failing. Electricity is getting weaker. Street lights start flickering. Traffic lights malfunction. Even buildings lose power intermittently. The whole city begins to struggle. But if you went outside the city and tested the river water flowing past it, everything might look perfectly normal. Because the problem isn't the river. The problem is happening inside the power plant. This is often what happens in chronic illness. The problem happens deep inside the cells, and routine blood tests simply aren't designed to detect that. There's another layer to this too. Even when the body is under significant stress, it will work incredibly hard to maintain normal-looking blood values. Your body prioritizes survival. It will pull minerals from tissues, shift hormones, change metabolism, all to keep the bloodstream stable. Because the bloodstream is keeping your brain and your vital organs alive. So ironically, you can feel terrible while your blood work still looks within range. And that range is another issue. Most lab ranges are statistical averages. They're based on the population being tested. But if the population itself is unhealthy, the range can shift in ways that still miss real dysfunction. So someone can sit right in the middle of normal range while their body is clearly struggling. Now let's talk about something that shows up again and again in people dealing with chronic fatigue and brain fog, and that is oxygen utilization. Your cells require oxygen to produce energy, and that process happens inside those mitochondria. When oxygen delivery is strong and the mitochondria are functioning well, cells produce plenty of ATP. But when oxygen delivery becomes impaired, or when the mitochondria struggle to use it efficiently, energy production starts to drop. And when energy production drops, symptoms begin to appear. We're talking fatigue, mental sluggishness, poor exercise tolerance, and even slow healing. In many chronic illnesses, there's several things that are happening all at the same time. Inflammation affecting the lining of the blood vessels, you have poor microcirculation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and immune system activation. All of these factors can reduce how effectively oxygen reaches the tissues and how well cells are able to use it. And again, Routine blood tests usually aren't measuring this process, which is why someone can feel like their body is shutting down while their reports say everything looks fine. Now, if this is familiar, I want to give you a resource to go deeper into how these systems interact, because when you start looking at chronic illness through the lens of oxygen delivery and cellular energy, a lot of confusing symptoms make sense. We put together the guide called The Synergistic Power of EWOT and Red Light Therapy. It walks through how circulation, oxygen delivery, and mitochondrial function all connect, and why improving those systems together can support cellular energy production in ways people often overlook. If you'd like to read it, there's a link below and you can download the guide. Now, before we wrap up, there's one more piece of the puzzle incredibly important, and it explains something many people feel but can't quite describe. When the cells struggle to produce energy, your brain begins to respond. The brain constantly monitors the body's energy state, and when it senses energy production is falling, it will start sending signals designed to slow you down. Fatigue, low motivation, brain fog, these aren't random symptoms. In many cases, they're protective signals. Your brain is essentially saying, we don't have the energy to do everything we need to do, so it tries to reduce activity, reduce movement, reduce cognitive load. In other words, it tries to conserve energy. But if the underlying issue isn't addressed, the protective response can become chronic. And that's when people begin to feel like their brain and body are stuck in a state of constant exhaustion. Understanding this shifts the perspective and can be incredibly powerful because it moves the conversation away from why am I lazy or why am I weak, why can't I just push through, towards a much more useful question. What is my body trying to tell me about its energy system? When you start asking that question, the symptoms many people experience begin to make a lot more sense. And that leads directly to something I want to talk about next, because fatigue itself, the feeling of being tired all the time, is actually one of the most misunderstood signals your brain can send. There's a very specific reason the brain produces that sensation. And when you understand it, a lot of chronic fatigue symptoms suddenly become much more clear. So if you want to understand what your brain is really doing when it makes you feel exhausted all the time, watch this next video. It's called Tired All the Time, Your Brain Might Be Trying to Tell You Something. I'll see you there.